Spoilers for Deltarune, up to and including every event in Chapter 4. So, Deltarune. With the advent of Chapters 3 and 4 releasing on June 5th, which by the time this video releases is roughly 3 weeks ago, I think, the single-celled sleeper agent organism that is the Deltarune community decided, well, probably should start making a bunch of videos on this, including me. Deltarune's first chapter came out during 2018, and because of the game only being half finished by the time this video releases, the game finds itself in an interesting state where I don't really feel the need to necessarily introduce what the game is or how the game is, while still being able to make theories on future events for the game. Long story short, if you're watching this video, you're probably already pretty deep in the weeds whenever it comes to anything Deltarune related, so I'm not going to talk about things like who Kris is, or who Susie is, or what the Dark Worlds are about, or anything like that. Odds are you know that already. And if you don't, and you randomly clicked on this video anyway, for one, apologies to my subscribers because this is probably not what you're expecting to come out this week, but then again, can you predict anything that I come out with? I mean, I made a DMC weapon tier list video last week, so no, I don't think anybody can tell what is gonna come out for me. Including myself, so, you know. And on the opposite side of that coin, even if you know nothing about Deltarune, I sincerely doubt you randomly clicked on this video to see what the game was about. And if you did, sorry, go watch somebody else's video for better context. Or better yet, just play the games. You can get the first 2 chapters for free, and it's like a, I don't know, 16-hour adventure all by itself. So let's just move on. Allow me to pose the question that's going to be the center of this video. It's also a question that has been bothering me since, well, I completed Chapter 1. Where the hell is Kris's knife? So, I know what some of y'all are probably thinking. Why try to answer a question as innocuous as this? Obviously, with the advent of Chapters 3 and 4 coming out, surely the last thing we need is another question to ask, right? Well, and see, normally, while I would agree with you there, the really cool and somewhat unique thing about all of Toei's games is how interconnected all of the story beats are. If we can truly, definitively, 100% say that one thing works the way that we assume it to work, the more we can use that information on other story beats. So, to answer your hypothetical question, I guess it would be, well, why not try to answer it? Kris's knife acts as a paradoxically large question mark for how understated it is as a concept. At least, you know, in regards to the storytelling proper. And even if the main takeaway for this video is just incredibly off base, I think it's still a question worth having in everybody's mind so that we can, you know, just sort of have it back there, sort of back pocket trick. And even going beyond this statement, Deltarune, but especially Undertale, show us that knives are sort of the poster child for violence as a concept. They act as a small, sharp, walking red flag, and is that not worth considering still? And speaking of red flags, look, Kris, can we talk for a second? We need to talk. Guess I'll, take that as a no, then. So, where do I even start with this one? Where does anybody start with Kris? Well, I guess for starters, they're working with the Knight, which is very concerning. And I mean, like, we all knew that Kris was up to something really weird, right? The ending of Chapter 2 came out of left field completely and utterly, for starters. But a fair argument could be made back then that Kris maybe just wanted to experiment with making a dark fountain. It seemed easy enough for them to seal one, so why not just make one real quick and see what happens? Maybe it was for good purposes back then, you know? Going out of the way to see what kind of answers they can come up with, but no, that's just not the case now. And look, I'm rambling here. Kris is sketchy, and you don't need me to tell you that. They happen to be really good at keeping secrets, including, but certainly not limited to, the entire existence of their knife. Like, think about it for a second. Go into your inventory if you're, playing Deltarune in the background or something, I know you are, and just see if you can find it, because you can't. You just can't. Somehow, Kris has some sort of secret inventory that we can't access, and this isn't the only time that this happens. We'll talk about that in a little bit, just, keep it in the back of your mind. But circling back to the knife, where is it? Presumably, Kris has it on their person at all times. And given what we know about Dark Worlds, shouldn't the knife turn into something? If a pencil in the Light World can turn into a wooden sword in the Dark World, much like how cards or computers can be whole, sentient beings, what would a knife turn into? When it comes to literally any of these questions, we just don't have an answer for them for some reason. Kris is a playable protagonist-antagonist figure, wrapped up in their own silent protagonist edginess, right? And I don't think I'm alone whenever I say that the first half of Chapter 4 made me feel kind of uncomfortable, and a little bit angry, sort of betrayed, right? The last couple of actions our player character has taken has now recontextualized those older actions that we've seen throughout the game, not only creating Chapter 3's Dark World, but also the other weird little things that they do, not wanting to look at pictures of other humans and such. Kris is troubled, obviously, and deeply troubled at that. So then, what do they hope to gain by doing any of this? Why even brandish a knife? Who gave them that knife in the first place? And what does it mean for it to be included in this story? Maybe it's worth taking a second look at all this. Yeah, let's just look back a little bit and see what we can glean from these past events. So let's do just that. But don't worry, we don't need to go that far back. Wait, hold on. Tenna, how do you know about the night? The only Lightners there at that time was Toriel, Susie, and Kris. Undyne was on the way, but she only ended up appearing at the end of the chapter, so it took her some time to get here. Unless... oh god, wait, hold on. Maybe the night isn't so much a who as they are a what. With this, allow me to humbly present to you all the most insane theory you'll probably hear ever about Deltarune. And not in a good way either. The Knife Knight theory. When Deltarune came out all the way back in 2018, I was a factually different person. I just got out of high school and started working a dead-end fast food job to make ends meet. But during that entire time, this initial question that started this whole video in the first place has been sort of plaguing me since I played the game for the first time. For me, Chapters 3 and 4 releasing felt like a literal gift from the universe. A birthday gift, no less. Only one day early and all of a sudden I'm a Deltarune gremlin again. What made it so much worse was the knight showing up at the end of Chapter 3. I know that from a writing perspective, this is perfect foreshadowing. Here is your main antagonist, look at how strong they are. Oh god, they're kicking my ass. And during that entire time, that question snuck its way back into my head again. And I, of course, felt compelled to answer. Saying something as ridiculous as, oh wait, Kris's knife is the Roaring Knight is obviously kind of insane. With what little we do know about Deltarune, there's a couple of little issues with this proposition that I will explain in time. Now, plenty of other people have gone on to say that, well, the Holiday family are obviously the strongest candidates here. And okay, fair. If we're going just based off of appearances with some of the attacks and especially the knight themselves, that's a reasonable assumption to make. But of course, I'm going to explain why I don't think any of them are the Roaring Knight. Up first, we have Carol Holiday. She's made 0 appearances up until Chapter 4, and the scene just before she made it back to the house made it seem like Kris called her in order to get Susie away from the guitar. There's other weird stuff going on, like how she happens to be cold to everybody except for Kris, and the fact that she keeps heart-shaped pillows everywhere. Right, so that's obviously concerning. Why do I not think she's a knight? Well, to keep a long story short, I just think it'd be too easy. We've been trying to figure out the identity of this thing for literally years. Then, all of a sudden, here comes Chapter 4, and all of this weird circumstantial evidence that doesn't directly say that she's the knight, but hints to it heavily. I, as well as many other people, simply think it's just a big red herring. Because again, it would just be way too easy. That, and then also, I sincerely doubt Carol would ever put Noelle in danger with the events of Chapter 2. I will admit that Carol is kind of a strict and definitely a really big mom, but putting your daughter in moral danger seems kind of ridiculous. Especially considering that there's flavor text in their house that alludes to Carol wanting Noelle to be perfect, or otherwise just celebrating every little achievement she does. Next up, we have Des Holiday. What's up with her? Couldn't tell you honestly, we still know nothing about Des other than she has a pretty big rebellious streak. Which, I mean, yeah, I guess, but like I said, we just don't know anything about her. Chapter 3 specifically drops a bunch of hints alluding to Des, having some sort of relevance to this story, but again, all of it is circumstantial, and correlation isn't necessarily causation. So then maybe it's Rudy. And okay, maybe possibly. He coughs loudly before just about every text box you have with him. The knight seems to struggle whenever they talk to Kris over the phone, and the knight is sometimes found in certain poses that would suggest that they're laboriously moving around. But once again, like with Carol, why would Rudy want to put Noelle in danger? Not only that, but Rudy also happens to be a lot more kind and charismatic than anybody else in the Holiday family. Could this just be a front? Admittedly, yes. But I feel like the biggest hint that people get sort of hung up on is the knight having antlers on top of their head. Whatever is sticking up out of their helmet is sort of sharp and angular, which does align a lot more with Carol's design with her character and her sprites. If we are to humor the idea that the knight is instead Kris's knife, these obviously wouldn't be antlers, but instead the hilt and handle of a knife, obviously twisted in a way that would align with how Darkeners are usually portrayed. And need I remind you of what Tenna said before he was so rudely cut down? He met the knight, had a whole conversation, and was given an objective. Now you tell me how anybody else would be there in that short of a time frame. Undyne was literally on the way to the Dreamer household. So from where I'm standing, the knight would have to be somebody or something that was already in the room whenever the fountain was created. And maybe whatever's sticking up out of the helmet are antlers. Okay, but why though? During the ending of Chapter 4, whoever was on the other end of the phone was talking about some sort of promise. Maybe this promise wasn't necessarily to them. I'll just come out and say it. Maybe Kris promises to free Des one day. And you could see the antlers as sort of a representation of that promise. In any case, I sincerely doubt that literally anybody would give Kris a knife willingly. Unless, again, they were known to be a little bit rebellious. Maybe Azriel gave it to them, or maybe Des gave it to them. I'm just saying. The song name for the knight's theme does happen to be Black Knife, which I know doesn't prove anything, I just, wanted to say something about that. But hold on, I hear you screaming at your computer screen, or phone screen, or whatever. Darkeners can't make dark fountains. And yeah, you're right, good for you. Good on reading up on all the knowledge and all that. But let me ask you this question. So, you remember whenever Queen was explaining how dark fountains are created, right? You have to plunge something into the earth with determination in your heart, focus on the dark world, and then it gets created. Okay, cool. What happens to the plunged object? Obviously, it would have to go somewhere, right? Maybe the reason we don't see the knife in Kris's inventory is because it's already taken form. And would an object so important to Kris not manifest into a sentient being? Maybe, for just this one instance, not only was Kris's knife acting as the catalyst to make a dark fountain, but also a battery that can hold determination, if only momentarily. If nothing else, it explains their dark star elemented powers, as well as their general appearance. I don't think it's all that hard to imagine anything that would be standing in a dark fountain would probably look like a pygmy titan. And what about the Dark Worlds themselves? The appearances of Kris, Susie, and Ralsei in the Dark Worlds leads me to believe that the same person created each and every one of them. Which is kinda weird, right? Because we know for a fact that the Chapter 3 fountain was made by Kris. The second sanctuary in Chapter 4 was made by Susie. And of course, it looks pretty different. So, hypothetically speaking, if a Lightener were to create a Dark World fountain, have it look a certain way, and then an object, which was given sentience by that Dark World, decide to make its own Dark World, would it not look the same? Maybe what little of the personality we do see in the Knight is representative of what Kris thinks, how Kris feels. And we already know that the Knight and Kris are working together, but maybe they're far more related than we initially thought. And nope, I got something to say about the black shards as well. The black shards are the chipped off pieces of the knife. That's part of the reason we can't see the knife in Kris's inventory. We would absolutely notice little pieces missing from it. And the black shards retaining their appearance, whether or not you are in a dark world or a light world, can be explained by the shards having no light world equivalent because they are broken off pieces of a darkener. Truly, the economy will never recover from this. Or this. Now, before I say absolutely anything else, let me just reiterate, if you don't necessarily agree with this theory, I still think the knife is worth considering, in some capacity. I am not at all opposed to this theory being wrong, but Deltarune is a game that's pretty important to me. If any of y'all happen to remember the Meta Makes You Care video that I made sometime last year, I think, maybe you specifically remember the disclaimer that I put in, saying that I didn't want to bring up games like Undertale or Deltarune. And the real reason I'm making a case here in this video is because I have something to say, and something worth considering, I think. In fact, if you do happen to disagree with this video, allow me to give you some ammo. So think back on when Kris and Susie left the first sanctuary in Chapter 4. The knight was deliberately shown flying away into the grand door, making it to the third sanctuary. Kris and Susie obviously leave, make it back to the light world, then Susie suddenly gets the idea of making a dark fountain herself, using Kris's knife. And unless the knight has some sort of ability to be in two places at once, I really don't have a counter-argument here. This really is the one thing that I kinda get hitched on here with this theory, and I'll admit, it kinda shoots the whole theory in the foot with a shotgun. So, like I said, there's your main counterpoint, I guess, and I don't really have any other way to transition into my next point. So hey, I guess Asgore also has a black shard for some reason? The only thing I can interpret here is that Asgore is a f***ing Chad and took on the knight by himself and basically won the fight, probably pretty similar to what we did. Obviously now Asgore and the Holiday family know something about the Dark Worlds. I'm willing to bet they know even less than we do, which means it doesn't really help us any here, but I will say that there's a prophecy of a Flower King trapped in Asylum. This has led many people, including myself, to believe that Flower King, Asgore's shop, to be the Chapter 5 Dark World. What I'm specifically going to be looking for in Chapter 5 is whether or not the Dark Fountain was created by Asgore or the Knight. And of course, the appearances of our main party. I don't think I need to spell it out, but just in case, obviously if Kris, Susie, and Ralsei look like how they do in every other Dark World, despite Asgore making the fountain, then this is once again another counterpoint to the Knife Knight theory. Another talking point I see sort of making its way around the block here in the community is how there might also be a spiderweb of allegiances here. Of course, the epicenter of these allegiances is obviously Kris, and as I said before, they're obviously working with the Roaring Knight. But when they were making those calls, I don't believe all of them were necessarily directed to the Knight. I personally believe that the very last call in the Holiday House was made directly to Carol, but the calls leading up to that point was between Kris and the Knight. These two have weird shady goals, and Kris might be more clever than we were expecting. Of course, Carol would be protective over Dessa's guitar, a person who's been missing, one of her daughters that went missing. At which point Kris said, "Oh, I have an idea," called Carol, got everybody kicked out, start the events of Chapter 4 proper, blah blah blah, you get that. Circling back to Kris for just a moment, one of the many things Undertale taught us as a game was that the only characters that could truly do any deplorably evil actions were humans. Now, there's nothing saying that this is or isn't the case in Deltarune, and more so than anything else, I just want to know the motive for why Kris is doing what they're doing. Because based on prior experiences, the precedence has been set. Trying to parse any information from the final phone call in a normal route, you could make a fair argument for things like, oh, it's just a deplorable evil action that they're taking. Maybe it's desperation. Maybe the Knight is blackmailing them. We just don't really know anything. And as it stands, with the events of Chapter 4, I have grown to mistrust Kris because of what they did in the Holiday House. Why get in our way? I don't think it's crazy to say, a bridge has been burned here. And more so than that, I was angry. And you know what? I knew how to get back at them. It's time now for things to get a little bit weird. Okay, but before we do that, there's something on my mind that I need to just sort of put down somewhere. I don't have any real good spot to put it, so let me just talk real quick about the one part of the prophecy regarding Kris. The first hero, the cage with human soul and parts? What does "and parts" mean? Well, okay, I guess it's time to speculate again. I've already explained that Kris and the knife, who in this case is, again, the Roaring Knight, might be more personality related than we initially thought. That is to say, "and parts" might be referring to how Kris is sort of a fractured being. So even if the knight can't be in two places at once, Kris probably is. Now I can't help but think about Rousey. Maybe he's like the ideal version of what Kris wants to be. A monster of Dreamer family inheritance, who can use magic, is kind, listens to everybody, and is liked by everybody. Given how Rousey knows way more than what he probably should about everything regarding this game, I think it just makes sense considering the whole secret-keeping nature of Kris anyway. And also, just as a little bit of a fun fact, when I was thinking about making this theory a couple years ago, I initially proposed that Rousey was Kris's knife. Once again, Rousey is a Darkener, and Darkeners have to come from something. Ultimately though, I didn't really rationalize enough of it to make it its own theory, so instead, Knife Knight theory. But yeah, anyway, what were we doing again? Stabbing a deer with a thorn, I think? So yeah, the weird route of Chapter 4 is awful, and we're gonna talk about it. Somehow, in between chapters, Kris can just find the time to do whatever they want, which I don't know how they did that, but nonetheless, they pulled the thorn out of Noelle's finger, and once again, like with the knife, hid it from us. Despite still being on their person. I have no idea why they turned into a freaky purple sleep paralysis demon during this section, and what the weird route is going to ultimately culminate into is also a big question mark for me. Now that being said, I know this entire video seems like a Kris Knight truther sort of just coping, but at the same time, wait, hold on. Please don't? Please don't. Oh, okay. So now you feel the need to beg. After all that you did, you think you're in any position to tell me what to do? This deplorable, edgy, emo, Blink-182 Simpsons guest star reject? Really now? No. No, I don't think so. Proceed. What, are you mad now? Why don't you just maul, seethe, cook, see if I care? As soon as I get out of this trash can, I'm gonna kick your stupid ass! Okay. Anyway, I don't think I'm alone in feeling a little bit betrayed here, as I said before. If we knew literally anything about Kris, what they're doing, and why they're doing it, maybe I'd feel differently. But then again, maybe that's kind of the creative intention here. At the end of the day, I still kind of feel bad for Kris. And I know why. They're a struggling teenager with a lot going on in their lives right now. On top of that, they've been told they have to save the world, otherwise it's going to be destroyed. And over the course of the 4 chapters we've played so far, something's been changing in them. Something genuinely good. It's hard to put into words, but for some reason, seeing Susie next to you, you feel like whatever you were, just for right now, it might be okay. This kid is simply not just a one-note villain. They've made connections, bolstered those connections. They're making genuine friends with new people. And what we're doing to Noelle in the weird route is slowly alienating their only other friend. Over the course of playing these 2 chapters, I've realized that Susie is my favorite character in all of Deltarune, and probably Undertale too. It's really cool to see her growing as a more confident person that can rely on other people. It also helps that she's just really cool anytime she does anything, basically. But you want to know the reason why quiet people piss her off? It's because quiet people hold secrets. Secrets they don't want her to know about. Betrayal is in the cards for the end of this story. And I'm genuinely afraid that it's going to ruin her. I have no idea what Kris plans to do, with or without the knife. But the one thing I do know is that they're a person all by themselves. I think our jobs as players of this game is to protect these characters from the worst case scenario. We need to gain their trust and in turn, trust them back. To keep an eye on them and make sure that this story has a happy ending. For a little while, I genuinely thought that Kris was just an antagonist. But then, I listened to the phone call. I waited around, and then they got up and played the piano. And when they did so, it sounded so human. When they play the songs, they take time to think about the next note before it comes. They fat finger a key on the piano, and the song's a little bit out of tune. But they're human imperfections. And I think Kris misses the simple pleasure that they used to take part in. I couldn't, in a million years, even begin to predict what the end of this story is going to look like. It seems to me that the rest of the game is on a steady development cycle for once, which is a good thing. Chapter 5 is slated to come out during 2026. But we all know the wait is going to be agonizing. But in the meantime, the bonds we forge with these characters, with this game, will continue to impact people. And while we're waiting, all I ask is that we don't forget. And there you go. That is Knife Knight Theory. As well as some other, Deltarune small talk sort of thrown in there. I think that's all I wanted to say, so I guess I'll wrap up now. As always, if you have your own counterpoint or counter theory to, what I expressed in this video, you can type out your comment or join the Discord. While you're down there, a like and subscribe is always appreciated, and you can ring the little notification bell if you want to see a new video from me. I upload every Friday and I cover a pretty broad range of topics across the entire channel, ranging from, well, honestly, all kinds of stuff at this point, just whatever I think is interesting. If you would like to support me monetarily, so that I can improve the quality of these videos and eventually make this a day job for me, you can join the Patreon starting at $1 a month. Special thank yous as always goes to the members of that Patreon, Stefan and Ari. If you would like to get access to early releases of videos before they come out on Friday, sneak peeks to videos before I get them done, and or giving me the ability to shout your name out at the end of these videos, like I said, joining starts at $1 a month. Man, this video is going to be a long one, isn't it? Right, so, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. I hope you enjoyed the video. Tune in next week for something completely different, and as always, have a good day, everybody.